Make Jinnah the Prime Minister. Why? Because Gandhiji thought if he can get out the British, then he will deal with the Muslims on his own terms. He had that sort of confidence in himself.
So much of suppressed information, so much of propaganda, so much of false narratives, and yet they are considered and are accepted as gospel truth. How? How come it is possible?
Bharat Bhagya Vidhata. If our national anthem uses Bharat Bhagya Vidhata, then why can't we use Bharat as the name of the country?
Welcome, Mr. Bundela, to this discussion. With this brief introduction, may I request to the chair, Mr. Balbir Punj, to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Munshi. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very interesting panel today. The author himself is a lawyer and a very senior one in Supreme Court. The other panelist we have has been a judge of the High Court, Hemant Gupta, and Mrs. Divan too has been additional Solicitor General of India. So I feel like a literate person in this august company. But all the same, when I saw this book, Integration of Bharat Political and Constitutional Perspective, and I saw that Mr. Bundela, the sort of work he has put in, I was honestly intimidated by the size of the book. It's really very large. But once I started reading it, I found it very, very interesting. So one suggestion I have is, if you get hold of the book, don't get intimidated by the size of the book. Just start reading it and you will finish it. Now, I will like to compliment Mr. Bundela for having written this book, because the debate on this issue, what constitutes India, and it has been going on for quite some time. And the book deals with the issue in a very incisive manner and clears so many coverts. So I'm very happy and give him a big hand for having written this book. But at the same time, I feel sad that an Indian has to write a book to redefine or define India. Even after so many years, 75 years of independence, people have been raising issues as to what constitutes India. And it is a fight between two narratives, basically. One narrative is that India is a very ancient nation, a timeless nation, and the history is lost in antiquity. And then, in that context, Mark Twain's observation, which he made in 1897, I'll just read two lines. He says, quote unquote, Varanasi is older than history, older than tradition, older even than legend, and looks twice as old as all of them put together. Now, what is relevant to Varanasi obviously applies to rest of India also. But then there is another interpretation, another narrative, that India is an artificial construct put together by the British, and it's not a nation, it is a union of states. And I'm reminded of a discussion in the hall which we have opposite the library in the main building of it. That was in 1980s. One British lord had come to speak. And in that he recalled all the achievements of the British in India and their contribution. And he said that we gifted India democracy and secularism and identity as a country. And there was a clapping. When there was a question answer, I was a cub reporter with Indian Express. So I asked him a question. Sir, thank you very much for having gifted democracy, secularism, and identity to India. But how come you denied the same thing to Pakistan and Bangladesh? Damn it. We are a country, democracy, and we are a secular state not because of the constitution. In fact, the other way around. The constitution is like this because of our civilization efforts. And India did not come into being because the British came here or they put the country together. The country is timeless, has been in a timeless existence. Now, if you look at the world over, you will find that the way we see the world today, it has been put together in the last 200 years. Italy came into being the way we know it in 1861. France was divided into so many states that it came into being the way we know it in 1789. And Germany was divided into 39, 40 small principalities. And it became a one country on 1871. Why? Two inventions changed the world. One was the telegraph in 1830s. Another was the steam engine railways in 1840s. Before that, for any large territory to be governed by a central power was difficult. Telegraph and railways made it possible. And it coincided with the arrival of the British here. And this is why they were able to put the country together. Now, there is another, what you can say, debate going on. Adivasis versus rest. आदिवासी इस देश के असली मालिक हैं. तो भैया हम लोग कौन है? हम encroachers हैं क्या? And we didn't have that sort of a society at all, where you had some sort of jungly people living in forest and some exploiters living in cities. Simple question. Ram, Lakshman, where did they go for education? To a university in a jungle, in a forest. Where did Lord Krishna, Balram go for education? अरे भाई, जो नगर में रहता था वो नगरवासी था, जो गांव में रहता था गांववासी था, जो वन में रहता था वनवासी था. But they were one civilization. They were one civilization. Probably the rishis who used to run the gurukuls and pathshalas and ashrams in the forest, they had the same status as the Cambridge, Oxford, and Stanford, because anybody who wanted higher education had to go there. It was not a different culture, different civilization. And last, because the time here is limited, this construction that India is a union of states, आदिवासी versus rest, और इस तरह की जो बातें होती हैं, they are all part of the British narrative which they use to set Indians against Indians. And I will end my presentation with two lines. अंग्रेजों के बारे में है, वो जाकर भी बाकी है यहीं, मैं यहीं का होकर भी यहाँ का नहीं. And now we go to the author, Bundela, to now please introduce us to your monumental work.
Thank you very much, sir. Today, indeed, it's a very significant day for me. I really thank India International Center for having organized this discussion and having provided such a significant platform to the book and to myself amongst all the distinguished panelists. I'm very grateful to Honorable Chair Shri Balbir Punj, Honorable Justice Hemant Gupta, and Honorable Shri Madhavi Divan for being present for this book discussion. I welcome all of you that today on Monday, all of you are here to signify the importance of the content of the book. Probably the subject matter is of relevance. As I'm here to express about my own work, it's really a very difficult task for me to summarize the entire 700 pages, 800 pages, which I have tried to pen down in so many years in 10 minutes. It's really a very challenging task for me. But as we all know, at least I can explain the entire scheme and the thought process behind it, why it was needed to write down this kind of work, and why I didn't bother about the pages. As you all know, I'm basically, by profession, I'm a student of law and a practicing advocate. But my inclination and love for history was from the very beginning. And probably that inclination, that interest brought me closer to the subject, the burning subject of Jammu and Kashmir. As the part of a team who was studying the legal aspect of the Jammu and Kashmir, how all the provisions that we dealt with as they existed before 2019 in our constitution book, and some provisions which were part of constitution, yet they were nowhere in the constitution book. So there were so many things written, so many things spoken about, and so many things expressed about Jammu and Kashmir. And we were exploring all those dimensions, all those discussions, and were trying to develop our own viewpoint on that, the legality of the subject matter. But as you all know, that probably if you look all the answers for any legal issue, probably it's not possible just to get an answer from law. So when you're dealing with law, when you're dealing with the constitution, you have to go into the background behind it, the process of evolution of those provisions. So you have to go into deep into the historical background of that subject matter, that provisions. When you go into the background, you understand the history, the politics, and other aspects. Sometimes when you have to consider the history, when you are an student of history or you jealously pursue history, probably history cannot be understood in isolation. To understand history, you may have to understand the culture, society, their evolution, the scientific evolution, and at the same time you are required to understand the law that are prevailing at that point of time, that had a huge implication on the history of that time. So therefore, for me as a lawyer, searching for certain answers, it was important to understand constitution. It was simultaneously important to understand the history of Jammu and Kashmir. But as I went into understanding the historical background of this entire issue of Jammu and Kashmir, what we realized, not only individually but my entire team, we realized that there is a layer after layer of half-baked truth. So much of suppressed information, so much of propaganda, so much of false narratives, and yet they are considered and are accepted as gospel truth. How? How come it is possible? Because they have been repeated in so many academic accounts. They have been spoken about so many so-called intellectual class, established authors, media persons, and etc. So we were duty bound to get into more details. As we went into more details, we realized that without understanding the entire process of integration of Bharat, here when I'm talking about the integration of Bharat, I'm trying to express it in a way that the integration of process that is generally termed as process that was taken place between 1947 to 1950 to bring together various provinces and various states, princely states together, and later getting them together into the constitutional scheme. So that was a very detailed scheme, very detailed process, which involves politics, which involved law, constitution, various personalities. So you have to study all of them, their perspective, their mindset, their reasonings, and various institutions that were playing significant role at that point of time. And when we go into the details, we see that various important, significant aspects, especially in relation to Jammu and Kashmir, were missed out. Like, for example, in relation to Jammu and Kashmir, we have often heard that Jammu and Kashmir was not merged. But what was the necessity of merger? In what kind of states merger was required? To understand that, you have to look into the provisions of the Indian Independence Act. You have to look into the provisions of Provisional Constitution Order 1947 or the Government of India Act 1947 as it was adopted. So therefore, here the politics, history, law, constitution going hand in hand. Unless we understand them very carefully, each step, we will not be able to understand the entire process and the objective behind various provisions that were ultimately formulated. But when we go further into detail, if you have to understand the entire process of integration, we cannot stop only in our study between 1947 to 1950. We also have to understand the transfer of power in Bharat at various stages of our history. Then now it is when we go into understanding of the transfer of power, you have to go back into the history. Transfer of, as you move backward, you realize that the transfer of power in the hands of we the people of India came from Britishers. From where did the Britishers get the transfer of power? In my humble understanding, which I tried to demonstrate in this book, that it was not basically from the Mughals, but the de facto power that was in the hands of Marathas. So when you go further backward, so the Marathas got it from Mughals. Now, when you go further backward, a further question arises: from where did the Marathas got the power? From where did the Mughals got the power? Then, if you go into the general history textbooks, you get a simple answer: the Sultanates, the Arabs, Turks, as you call them. But significantly, by the time Mughals entered India, or Mughals entered Bharat, more precisely to say, basically they had hardly any power left in India. Their power was confined only to the surrounding of Delhi. So basically at that point of time, the Mewar was holding the fort. And in the south, you see the Vijayanagar Empire was equally important and powerful. So how many of us has understood the importance and significance of Vijayanagar Empire, the Mewar, importance of Mewar, at the same time the importance of the Ahoms, the historical importance of various other dynasties that have played so much significant role in the resurrection, in the resistance, and in the re-emergence of Bharat as we see today. And if we go further backward, then the invasions did not just started from 17th century onwards. We also see that the foreign invasions had happened long back in the history, starting from the Greeks at the time of Alexander, at the time of Huns, Shakas, Kushans. We all confronted them. How did we manage to confront them so jealously, so strongly, and yet we are standing today so tall? Because there was a consciousness. That consciousness which is still prevailing. That consciousness of Bharat. Bharat as a nation, which is not a creation of Britishers or of Mughals or of Sultanates, but a creation of time immemorial. If you look into the text of Mahabharata, if you look into the text of Varun Puran, if you look into the text of Vedas, you get n number of traces of Bharat, not only as a cultural unit, but also as a geographical, also as a territorial, also as a political unit. So all these important aspects of the history have not been told to us, or were not written as much as they were required to be written. And if at all somebody had made an attempt to write them down, they were not propagated. Why they were not propagated? I'll just try to second my thoughts and will make use of what K.M. Panikkar has wrote in his book, Survey of Indian History. He writes, ever since India became conscious of her nationhood, there has been a growing demand for a history of India, which would try and reconstruct the past in a way that would give us an idea of our heritage. Brought up on textbooks written by foreigners, whose one object would seem to have been to prove that there was no such thing as India. We had to each to discover India for ourselves. I do not think it is an exaggeration to say that it was a spiritual adventure for most of us to gain in one measure an understanding of historical process which have made us what we are, and to evaluate the heritage that has come down to us through 5,000 of years development. These are the thoughts of K.M. Panikkar and his monumental work that he has created. Probably it's just a continuation of that work of K.M. Panikkar. So, there are various facets of history. History also involves philosophy. While we are making an attempt to understand Bharat, we will also have to make an attempt to understand its philosophy, its ultimate goal, why it is in existence even today. Its existence is continuing because its goals, its objectives are also eternal. Its goals are not just goals for the personal growth as a political unit, Bharat, but goal to uplift the entire humanity towards the spiritual progress, to lead them towards the path of eternity. That is the goal of Bharat. And these goals are eternal, and that is why Bharat is also continuing. That is why when in 1947 an occasion arose that let us come together to create a Bharat much stronger, much vibrant, much more conscious, and much more spiritually evolved. Every individual unit, either political, individual, cultural, came together and contributed in their own way. I would sometime in this process of understanding the history, we sometimes forget to understand the contribution made by various units. Often we miss the contribution of various princely states also. I would just like to quote, it's one of my favorite quote, as I could say it. When a group led by Nawab of Bhopal was trying to create fault line amongst various rulers to prevent them from acceding towards India and preventing them from getting integrated with Bharat. An attempt was also made to persuade the Marana of Udaipur. The reply that Marana Bhupal Singh gave is very significant to consider. What he said, my choice was made by my ancestor. My choice was made by my ancestors. If they had faltered, they would have left a kingdom as large as Hyderabad. They did not, neither shall I. I am with India. Thank you very much.
The problem is that we were colonized for quite some time. Now the colonizing power, it has a view about the colonized people. And when they colonize the colonized people, they transplant successfully their perspective about the colonized people. Colonized people start looking at themselves the way the colonizing power had looked at them. So that is the crisis we have. And Mr. Yashraj was talking about Kashmir. The instrument of accession which Maharaja Hari Singh signed with the government of India in October 1947, including full stop, comma, it was exactly the same as India had signed with the rest of over 500 rulers. It was no different at all. No different at all. So there has been a lot of propaganda that India had promised this thing to Kashmir, this thing to Kashmir. It was full stop, comma, everything common. Now we have Justice Hemant Gupta and former Judge Supreme Court of India. And that's all. Now we wait for your judgment.
Actually, Mr. Balbir Singh, Balbir Punj, Ms. Madhavi, Divan, my dear friend Ram Subramaniam, former Judge of Supreme Court, and of course Yashraj, Bundela. No, this is a subject of the historians and who have studied more history and than me, who have studied only law books. I think Ram Subramaniam would have been a better choice for explaining the concept of history but today's job is assigned to me. I will try to say something about it. All of us know that Article 1 talks about India, that is Bharat. What does it India mean and what does Bharat means? You know, last year the debate was initiated that India, the government is trying to change the name of India into Bharat. And some people started saying it that, the India, there's English speaking people are India and Hindi speaking or the natives are Bharat. What a pity of their thought process. Actually, if you see, the passports carry Republic of India and Bharatiya Ganrajya. So even from the government point of view, Hindi means, it's defined as Bharatiya and the English means Indian. That is the mindset with which we have grown in last 75 years or so. Another debate which arises is India a union or a federation? The genesis of this problem, this argument, is the Government of India Act 1935, which talks about India as a federation. Because the British were not ruling the entire India at any given point of time, so they used to annex the kingdoms as being a federation, as a federation center. So therefore, the concept with which we have grown is that federation, India is a federation and not the union. This is the most unfortunate interpretation of the constitution. As Yashraj has explained, that Bharat is a old age name, name for ages, which we have used it. It is not a one-day event. It is Bharat is a civilization. It's not a political or a geographical area. I remember, in our house there used to be havan on good occasions. There was one word, Jammu Dvipa. Bharat Khande Jammu. So I had no idea what this Jammu Dvip means. Now, when I tried to search it, Jammu Dvip is an island which talks about Indian island, which includes even Thailand, Cambodia, and other islands. So, when I go next and Havan is held in our home, I am going to ask Pandit to explain about Jammu Dvip. I would say that constitution framers were very principled person. They didn't realize that what is going to be Indian mindset. Like reservation was provided for 10 years and it is continuing for 80 years. English was said to be a language for 15 years, then as subject to the law, and law was made in 1963 that it will continue forever. It's a strange thing. In the 8th schedule mentions the languages of the country. English is not the language mentioned in 19 languages mentioned in the 8th schedule. But English is the prevalent language. Most of the people talk about English. English, Hindi is in a serious, or the regional languages are in a serious trouble. I have seen the mothers speaking with their child, young child, 5 years, 4 years, in English. By this process, the regional languages will diminish, will go, will not be there. Like we have forgotten about Sanskrit, same thing will happen about the Hindi and regional languages. I have a very interesting anecdote to narrate. One of our friends, her grandson studies in a public school. The mother says that, her dadi wanted to talk with the child in Punjabi. The mother said that, no, Mama, don't talk with this child in Punjabi because it is not supposed to be talked about, because the school says that you have to talk with the child in English only. What will happen? The atmosphere of and that grandmother, is also a convent educated, a boarding school student. Not that she is grown in English culture. Of course, she has studied in a convent school, but she has not forget about her language. And we are here, the mothers are making it sure that the child doesn't speak Hindi or Punjabi. It's a very surprising. In Delhi, only one school, public school, so-called good schools, teach Hindi up to class 5. None of the schools teach Hindi from they start teaching English from the class 1. Where the generation will go? We'll all forget about, our next generation will forget about Hindi or the regional languages. Honestly, my daughter, she also studied in a convent school. She finds Hindi very difficult. because the mindset in the schools is that Hindi is difficult. If that kind of knowledge or that kind of a fear is embedded into the mind of the child, we are going to forget about Hindi, or even for that matter, Tamil. I have another example from Tamil Nadu. One of our friend's daughter, she married a Tamilian doctor guy. Both are doctors. The mother-in-law of that uh, girl tells her daughter-in-law to talk to the child in Punjabi, so that he learns the language when he goes to his nani or nana ghar. At least he is able to converse with them. What a difference between North India. Actually, honestly speaking, our value of culture in North is very different from the value of culture in South. But I think Lord Macaulay in 1835 or 36 said that we should teach English or our education system to the Indians. We are seeing the effect of his seed now after almost 200 years. We are forgetting about our languages. We feel ashamed to talk in our languages. That is not done. That should not be done. So we'll be only India. We'll not be Bharat. We need to be a Bharat for that matter. Actually, even our national anthem has the second line is Bharat Bhagya Vidhata. If our national anthem uses Bharat Bhagya Vidhata, then why can't we use Bharat as the name of the country? Bharat gives us pride. Bharat revives of our civilization, our culture. India is India is a name which was in use for, I think, 300 years, or with the Britishers, the word India came into more practice, maybe earlier also. But we should use Bharat more prevalently, so that we don't, and things associated with Bharat, language, culture. In one school I went for a for a play. They were their Indian plays are not being played. This Macbeth and Shakespeare, that's what are played in the school. If Amar Chitra Katha has very good stories, small stories for the children, but nobody goes through those stories. We need to imbibe our children with Amar Chitra Katha kind of stories, with Indian plays, Indian languages. We should feel proud of it. At last, and in a lighter vein, there are two national parties. One's name starts with B, and one's name starts with I. I will end it.
Thank you, Justice Gupta. When we were talking about Hindi, I was reminded of an anecdote. There used to be one power secretary called Mr. Rajgopal. He later on became the cabinet secretary also. We were good friends when he was a power secretary. So in the evening, he will hold a darbar where joint secretaries and some of his friends will drop in for a cup of coffee, and we will have chai pe charcha sort of a thing on everything under the sun. One day I was sitting there, and one of the joint secretaries, who was obviously from South India, he complained that the bloody Doordarshan and Akashvani use such Sanskrit Hindi, so difficult to follow. Why can't they use simple language? And everybody nodded and supported it. Little later I said, You guys have a problem with the Hindi news in Doordarshan and Akashvani. My mother has a problem with English news in Doordarshan and Akashvani. Now they said, well, what is wrong with that, Balbir? Why can't your mother follow that? I said she can't follow it because she didn't study English. He has picked up some English from her children like me. He said, but she has to know English to understand the English news. I said, you guys also have to understand Hindi, read it as a language, and don't expect it, Akashvani and Doordarshan, to bring it to the level of a sabjiwala or street level. So it's a language which has to be understood. But sir, I don't share your pessimism. I'm quite hopeful Hindi will continue and regional languages will also continue, not because of our efforts, because of Hindi cinema and television. And they may be doing Macbeth and other plays in the schools, but I know when Ramayana comes on television, every household sits on. So scene is not that pessimistic. I am quite optimistic that given our inherent strength, we should be concerned about it, but we should not be worried about it. Now, the next speaker we have is another legal luminary, Mrs. Madhavi Goradia Divan. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Well, I cannot have any claims to scholarship. I'll begin with that caveat, at least on this subject, none at all. But I am a practicing lawyer, and what I do notice is the shortcomings of my own tribe, and which is that we tend to approach law in a vacuum. And I think our training and our thinking is not adequately multidisciplinary. And when it comes to the Constitution, a study of the Constitution, working of the Constitution and of the law, I think we need context, we need history, and I agree completely with the author on this, that we need to understand the background a little bit, in some depth. And I would say that not just lawyers, generally civil society, and particularly children. I think this is what strikes me most when we talk of the integration of Bharat. I think a lot of young people in our country, very young students, really don't have a clue about how we came together as the nation as we know it. And I think this is also a failure and a shortcoming of our education system, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. A few days ago, and a relatively unusual experience for me, I was addressing a group of students, school students, class 9, 10, 11. And the subject I was asked to address them on was the contentious issue of the Uniform Civil Code. And one child asked, he said, why is it that the Uniform Civil Code was not introduced in 1947 or when the Constitution came into force? Why is it that it took? It's still we don't have a Uniform Civil Code. And why is it that equal laws were not introduced at the time? And I said that yes, ideally, we should have pushed the envelope at the time. But the truth is that we did have very pressing, immediate priorities at the time, and perhaps this was left on the back burner. It may have been the easier option to take at the time, but we did have a lot of challenges at the time. We were living in the aftermath of a very bloody partition, as we know, an uprootment of an absolutely otherwise unimaginable scale, the biggest uprootment, I think, in human history, where, as we know, the Bharat, as we understand it as a concept, the subcontinent, was sort of torn asunder, cut off, the limbs, as it were, lopped off at the shoulders to create the state of Pakistan on either side. And, apart from that, of course, we had resistant and recalcitrant princes, a proposal for the establishment of a princesstan. I think it was Winston Churchill who put it like that. And so we had a whole host of challenges at hand. And I think just putting together this nation, of course, it has an ancient history and all of that, but yet to stitch it together, to stitch it back together was such a, I mean, it was nothing short of a miraculous feat, the way it happened. And given all those challenges, perhaps, everything else was put on the back burner. And so the UCC, for instance, went into the directive principles of state policy and remained for a very long time, at least only an aspiration. So, therefore, the state was in such a state of fragile infancy, and internationally, the soothsayers and pundits had written us off. So, and I think it is important for a younger generation. I was a student of history till class 12, but I do not remember, and I think I was broadly an earnest student. I do not remember the being taught in any detail about the unification and the integration of the states that form India. The political unification, we did not study it in any detail. I asked a school principal just this morning, I said, how much do you teach this? And she showed me a chapter from class 12. And it's there, but only for children who opt for history in class 2. I do not remember it in my syllabus, though I do remember studying in class 9 and 10 the unification of Italy, Garibaldi, Germany, Bismarck, class 9 and 10. So I doubt very much that, I would have forgotten what came later in class 11 and 12. It wasn't there. So, I think this should be a staple diet for any child in this country. We lay a lot of emphasis on the independence struggle, as we should, but this is a very important part of the story because it will sensitize us and give us an appreciation of how important it is and how hard fought this battle was. It wasn't only about independence. We could have been balkanized very, very easily. It was all pretty touch and go. So I think it's really, really important to have this as a part of our education curriculum in a much more serious and basic way. We had, for instance, Hyderabad. It was only much later as an adult, and only in, I would say, the last maybe couple of decades that I actually read about Hyderabad and how it became an ulcer, as it was called, an ulcer in the abdomen of India. And how the Nizam was, his aspiration was to set up a new caliphate because his own son or grandson, I think grandson, who passed away very recently actually, he had the blood of the original caliph, the Ottoman, and how he was negotiating, as in the Nizam was negotiating with the Portuguese colony of Goa to get seaway to the west. So all this was happening in the heart of India, and it could have been lost. And I would acknowledge that, yes, we used force, perhaps even excessively at times. I mean, there's a criticism, but at the end of the day, are we not appreciative of the fact that we are this large and very varied, diverse nation that came together? And sometimes this does happen. I mean, in the United States of America, for instance, there was a civil war at great material cost and great human cost. just to keep that nation together. And perhaps the United States of America would not have become the great superpower that it did had it not been so grand and large a union. And personally, I think I am very appreciative of the fact that I grew up in a school where we went to school, and all of us, I'm sure, have with, many, children from other communities. I went to Iran once, and I was asked by the tourist guide, do you actually study with people from other communities? And I said, of course. And he said, you are so fortunate, because in our country, the minority, that is the Zoroastrian community, they only can go to their own schools, exclusive schools. So, these are small things which tell you how important it is to be part of a grand union. We could have ended up as small balkanized units. And when you see the map of those 565 princely states, which some of them were pretty large, and the lion's share was within the territory of what we now know as India. So that, a lot of that could have been lost. Not just Hyderabad, you had, of course, Bhopal standing out. You had even Jodhpur and Indore, who till some point did Travancore, was interesting. So all of this was happening, and I think it is therefore really, really important for us to know this story. And at least for lawyers, I think it's very important that the author has made this great effort, and I'm sure that a lot of us lawyers will make the effort of reading the book through. India, as we know it, as a geographical expression, a geographical entity, of course, it's a contiguous entity, and so we know it as that. But it was also much more than that. And for instance, now the mutts established by Adi Shankaracharya in all four parts of the country, four corners of the country, in a sense, it tells you something. It says something, that the idea of India, the idea of Bharat, much predated, of course, the British and their introduction of the administrative system, etc. And what was that? It was not just about territory. It was a civilizational ethos. It was a civilizational coherence. And I would not make the mistake of putting it, of approaching it from the narrow prism of a religious identity. I think that is a very narrow way of looking at it, because this was a much larger, much wider civilizational consciousness that we're talking about. And this is what really threaded us all in different parts of the country together. So, when I think Yashraj puts, he's chosen his title well, he's chosen it carefully. It's not even unification of India, unification of Bharat. He talks of the integration of Bharat. And I think the choice of words, both integration and Bharat, they mean something. When we talk of Bharat, of course, even though it appears in the context of territory in Article 1 of our Constitution, I think it's much deeper and wider than just territory. It's something that clearly transcends territory. And what is it? So I would say, and just moving a little bit into, post-independence, look at our Indian diaspora. Just look at the expanse of the diaspora today. And I'm not only talking about migrants to the US or the UK. Look at it in terms of the Caribbean, parts of Africa, parts of, say Fiji, for instance. We've had generations of people of Indian descent in so many different corners of the world. Now, what is it? Now, these are people who perhaps don't even speak our language. And I've had the opportunity to interact with, through law conferences, etc., to a lot of people of Indian origin, say from the Caribbean, from Fiji, from Africa, all of that. And, it's much more than the color of the skin. It is, they belong to different countries. They have passports. I mean, they've been there for generations. Their grandparents were perhaps born in those countries. They don't speak an Indian language. And yet there is an affinity, there is a sense of identity. And what is that? There is a connect. There is a sense of belonging, an affiliation, which transcends, it's, they are working in those countries, they're paying taxes in those countries, they have their allegiance to those countries. They are nationals and patriotic nationals of those countries, and yet they have, I cannot put my finger on it, but perhaps it is a spiritual connect. And I don't mean this in terms of pure, a religious affiliation. It is certainly a higher consciousness. There is a collective memory. It's perhaps cultural DNA, call it what you will, but there is a connect. And it's much deeper than the color of the skin or language or nationality or a passport. So there is that something, and this is unique about the Indian subcontinent. This is something really unique. You cannot, for instance, an African American, Africa in the same way, he perhaps does relate, but not in the same way as a person of Indian descent relates to India or Bharat, the idea, the notion. It's not just territory. So it's interesting because when we look at, say, nations that have been carved out in the last, say, the last century, I can think of two immediately. I would say that sometimes these are artificial constructs, purely artificial constructs. I'll give the example, say, of Pakistan, which, it was founded in a territory which was, it was artificial because that territory had almost nothing to do with why it was founded in that place. It wasn't a holy homeland. There was no holiness attached. There was nothing sacred in that sense to that land. There was nothing, it was actually the cradle of the Indus Valley civilization. The lion's share perhaps of the, holy places for Sikhs was in that territory. The Buddhist, the ancient sites are located there in rich abundance. So it was a completely artificial construct. Now, at least with Israel, there is a sense of, the holy land, the promised land, etc. But, Bharat or India is very different because it is the natural, the real, the land of consciousness in that sense where this civilizational consciousness emanated. It is the cradle of that civilizational ethos. And in that regard, I think Bharat is very different. And increasingly, we have to open ourselves to that integration also. It's not in terms of nationhood. It's not in terms of that sort of loyalty which you have for, a citizen of the country, but it's a different kind of affiliation and loyalty. And that tribe is only growing across the world. So that's interesting. And I would say that it transcends religion. It's a much deeper consciousness. We began to box Hinduism only when other faiths came in, but it's actually what we're talking about, the consciousness. I think it does a great disservice to just box it into one particular faith. And I think you put it very well, Yashraj, when you talk of a life force, you talk of a soul force. Perhaps it is that, and there is some kind of magnetic draw to that consciousness. You also use the word integration as opposed to unification. It's, of course, what is that aspiration? And I think in some ways it's still work in progress, because of course we have political unification, economic unification also, one common market. It's a, imagine if we were splintered into small little states. The expanse for economic prosperity for economic opportunity would be much less. And I think it's important to recognize that. For instance, why is it that Pakistani artists, for instance, they aspire, they want to come to India to perform? Why is it? Because it's a huge platform out there. It's enormous. It's just a absolutely phenomenal platform to showcase yourself, which you're not going to get in a smaller, more sort of blinkered kind of setup. So this is important, economic unification. And then you have, and I think perhaps in some ways is the most important, which is the social integration. Even that social integration has so many different facets, and which may be, of course, inter-community. It may be intra-community, caste being one of those important facets of the need for social integration. Gender. Gender is very important, both inter-community and intra-community. Gender equality is a part of our process of gender equality. And I think in this context of social integration, I will say that the value that is most underplayed in our constitution is the value of fraternity, which finds place in the preamble. But we don't talk about it enough. We don't apply it adequately. And I think there's great potential in the value of fraternity. And in the end, I would say that, it's interesting that the Constitution itself was meant to be this charter for social disruption, as they say, because we were trying to sort of establish a new order. We were trying to put away the scourges of the past and forge a new future for ourselves based on the values that the Constitution set out. And it is, Granville Austin described it as a charter for social revolution. And while it talks of revolution, I think there is also an underpinning the importance of stability. And that's where, the whole idea of integration fits in. And therefore, I think it's very significant that you've used the words integration of Bharat. Perhaps it's still work in progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madhavi ji. You are talking about India and Pakistan. India, of course, is a political, geographical identity, but at the same time, it is also a civilizational concept. Similarly, Pakistan is a geographical entity, it's a reality today, but it is also what you can say a civilization concept. And it's a mindset, basically. And that mindset transcends geographical borders. The irony of history is Pakistan is situated in an area where people did not want Pakistan. That's fact. They didn't want Pakistan. You had the Punjab Chief Minister, Sikandar Hayat Khan of Unionist Party. He said no to Jinnah. And ultimately, Jinnah had to use the British government to get his government sacked and replace him with somebody else. And Sikandar Hayat Khan, who was a very big landlord of Punjab, owning more than 10,000 acres of land, and a very prosperous man, he died penniless in America because the Pakistan, when it came into being, it hounded him so much that he had to go and seek shelter in America, where he died penniless. Similarly, there was a chief minister called Allah Baksh in Sindh. You can all Google it. And Allah Baksh government too had to be sacked because Allah Baksh, as the chief minister, in Quit India movement, he decided to return all the honors which the British had conferred on his family and said no Pakistan, and the British must leave India. We know about Pakhtunistan. We know about Balochistan. This is all what Pakistan is made of. And none of the people over there, what constitute Pakistan today, wanted Pakistan. It were basically people from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Bengal. They wanted Pakistan. and about 20-25% of went there, but 75 decided to stay here, with the result in 1948 when Sardar Patel went to Calcutta, he asked the audience, which was largely Muslim, it's a recorded speech. He said कि कल तक तो आप पाकिस्तान की बात करते थे, आपका मन बदल गया है, मुझे कैसे पता लगेगा? It's a recorded speech of the Home Minister of India. Number two, you are talking about the Constitution. Constitution is very valuable, but ultimately it's a piece of paper. If it doesn't reflect the ethos of the civilization and the people it's supposed to govern, it has no value. And we saw it in Kashmir in 1988, 89, 1991. Supreme Court was there, sir. All the lawyers were there. Indian Army was there. Media was there. None came to the rescue of 5 lakh Pandits who were hounded out, and they did not get any support from this constitution. So constitution is effective to the extent it reflects the ethos of the civilization it is supposed to go on. Now, and Madhaviji's exposition was very brilliant. Now the question, time for question answers. So any questions to any of the panelists? We have got 10 to 15 minutes for that. Yes, please. Identify yourself and ask the question.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, a former fighter pilot. And I've been privy to what you just said, the Kashmiri Pandit thing, because I was in South Block. And that night, the Army Corps Commander was ringing, what is it, what he should do. And he was told, no, relax, we'll let you know. That's all. So this other thing is there, sir. So my question is that we all know what the situation of India was in late 16th, 17th century, where very high percentage of world GDP were there. Why is it that it has been mentioned that somehow or other Macaulay's teaching overwhelmed us and we could not even talk of the greatness. But yet I find that there are forces which want to divide India, which want to make us subservient once again, whether it is Assam, whether it is mass conversions of religion, or so many things, but supported by us, within us. Why is our machinery incapable of dealing with this situation? Why democracy? Is it a weak form of a government? Or there is some ulterior motive behind people that democracy basically is everybody fills his pocket, so they don't want to fight. So what is the reason, sir?
Would you like to answer this question? See, 1955, there was a Bandung, there was a conference of 9 non-aligned nations in Bandung. There, Sukarno, the then Prime Minister or President of Indonesia, made one statement. He said the colonial, when they leave the country, they leave a small section behind of colonized people who continue to govern the country at their behalf. So when the British left, now it will be another subject for the lecture. In 1946, we were supposed to elect the future Prime Minister of India. 14 PCCs were called. And the question was put to them, who should be the Prime Minister? 12 of them. This has been all recapitulated by Durga Das in his famous generation book. And 12 said Sardar Patel. One said Acharya Kripalani. And one took some other name. There was no vote for Pandit Nehru. Gandhiji looked at Acharya Kripalani, who was presiding. So Acharya Kripalani said, I am withdrawing my name, because he had one vote. Then Gandhiji looked at Patel, and being a very disciplined man, he said, I too withdraw my name. Then Acharya Kripalani said, I propose Pandit Nehru. and Pandit Nehru became the Prime Minister. Later on, Durga Das, who was a very well-known journalist, editor of Hindustan Times of those days, he asked Gandhiji, and he has said in his book, that why did you favor Nehru over everybody else? And the reply which Gandhiji gave, he said we needed an Englishman to deal with Englishmen. So I hope it answers your question.
Well, this is S.S. Bhakhri, Director Institute of UN and UNESCO Studies. Well, pointing towards the last speaker's building exposition on the whole, I would like to know from you, do you think, what would you think about the future of Pakistan in the years to come, decades to come? Is it going to be this, or is it going to be disintegrated and eliminated?
This is an unfair question. Even Pakistanis don't know their future. How you expect Madhavi to know their future? In Pakistanis don't know what will happen.
And second is, it then pertains to Pakistan as well as India. Well, you know, in 1959, England's greatest historian, Professor Arnold Toynbee, was invited by Nehru to deliver first Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Memorial Lecture. And here in India, Professor Arnold Toynbee declared that Pakistan is a partial culmination of thousands of years of Muslim efforts to convert India into a pan-Islamic state. So do you think ultimately this is going to be realized one day? The Arnold Toynbee's prediction made in 1959 or 60 in India.
Sorry. You might find that answer in Dr. Ambedkar's book on partition. Well, clearly, I think Pakistan is. When I made a reference to Pakistan, I think we need not be over. I don't want to lay any overemphasis. It was perhaps in the more. I think we sometimes give it more importance than it really deserves. But what I wanted to give you an example was it could have been Pakistan, it could have been some other country in the world. But what I wanted to really say was that look, India, that is Bharat, is the, it's the real and the genuine. I mean, this was the land which was the cradle of that civilizational thought. Unlike Pakistan, which was an artificial construct. It was described by Venkat Dhulipala as the new Medina. The new Medina, which came in after the downfall, I guess more than a couple of decades after the downfall of the Caliphate. And where people were to look towards that land as, the Muslim nation state. But I think that, it suffered a terrible failure. You saw what happened in 1971. And I would say that even, beyond a point, we should not blame individuals and people. Because if you see, why is it that the streets of Lahore, or I'm not sure which city in Pakistan, but I remember reading that when the Ramayana was shown, the streets were empty. In Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, you see, they also have a certain affiliation to this larger civilizational ethos. Let's not forget that. If you look at Iran, for instance, you will see that, they are so proud of their original Persian culture. And you can't take it out of people. For instance, on Navroz is not it's not looked upon as a Muslim festival in that sense. It's a festival that predates Islam in Iran. It's it's a Persian festival, and where they actually decorate what they call haftaseen on their tables, which is, I mean, they are so proud of their innate Persian culture. So this is the consciousness that I talk about is a civilizational consciousness. It's not, religion is it's there. It's an important part of identity, no doubt. But what I'm talking about, and I don't want it to get lost in this sort of Indo-Pak skirmish. I think we are beyond that now. Surely we are beyond that. I mean, it's an unfortunate state, and I think I worry because it's an economic bankruptcy. So I think we should be worried about migration, frankly, to this part of the world. So I wouldn't I wouldn't otherwise worry myself too much with Pakistan. We have other challenges before us. So let me leave it at that. Thank you.
Punch up, just here, Rajesh. So that reference to, because for the first time in a discussion, someone referred to Ambedkar's partition of India, and the Ambedkar poses a question that no one, neither Hindu Mahasabha nor Congress had an answer to the two nations story. So I still believe that even today, that answer to the two nations story, we are not able to find out. I just wanted to know your views about it. Ambedkar said Pakistan was there because no one had the answer to the two nations story.
I would beg to disagree on this. The sad fact of partition is, I just now mentioned to you how Allah Baksh, the Chief Minister of Singh, Pakistan, Balochistan, Punjab, the Muslims over there overwhelmingly did not want Pakistan. Pakistan was essentially a British concept. It was a British concept. If you look at Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, if you look at other Muslim leaders, Iqbal, then a whole lot of names are there. They all stood for United India in the beginning, including Jinnah also. It was only when they started sleeping with the British and started changing from 1925-27 later on, because the British had alienated the Muslims because of Khilafat. And Gandhiji was competing with the British to win over the Muslims. And in that competition, Gandhiji had very little to offer. The British had all the power. So the British lured the Muslims, and overnight, I won't say overnight, but in a couple of years, all these Muslim leaders who used to speak in terms of Hindu-Muslim unity, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan used to say कि दो आंखें हैं हिंदुस्तान की, एक मुसलमान है, एक हिंदू है. They all started speaking on two nation theory. And the British had their vested interest, global strategic interest, to create Pakistan. And that issue has been dealt with in great detail by Narendra Singh Sarila in his book. I'm forgetting the name of the book. He was a former IFS officer. And in fact, incidentally, he was the Maharaja of the smallest sovereign state, princely state. It was Sarila, near Jhansi, and the total area of the country was 10 square kilometers. I've been to that place. But it had a judiciary of its own, it had an army of its own, it had its own administration. 10 kilometers total area. So, and later on, the Maharaja was drafted because he was very educated by Pandit Nehru to be part of the Indian Foreign Service. He served in several countries of Europe and accessed the papers which were being opened up, and then wrote that amazing book which reveals the conspiracy. So British needed to create Pakistan to contain basically Russia. And So, two partition theory was not an Indian product. It was essential. This is why, Mahatma Gandhi, in desperation, went to Lord Mountbatten in April 1947. Make Jinnah as the Prime Minister. Make Jinnah as the Prime Minister. Why? Because Gandhiji thought, if he can get out the British, then he will deal with the Muslims on his own terms. He had that sort of confidence in himself because he was very intelligent. He realized that this Pakistan demand, the Muslims are just the front. The basic powerhouse behind this demand is the British. So there was the answer. And number two, the great Calcutta killings of 1946 August, that demoralized the Congress leadership. Estimates vary, 20,000 died, 50,000 died, we don't know how many people died. They were killed in the streets of Calcutta. And at that time, the Congress leadership, Sardar Patel, Nehru, they all realized that we cannot combat that. हम इसको संभाल नहीं सकते. I wish there was an Abraham Lincoln in India at that time, who would have said, we will go for civil war, but we will not accept the partition of the country. And these people wanted to avoid violence. They were gentlemen. They did not want the country to be divided. Nehru didn't want it. Patel didn't want it. Gandhiji definitely didn't want it. But they accepted it as a fait accompli. And ultimately, 100 प्याज भी खाए, 100 जूते भी खाए, 100 कौड़े भी खाए, क्योंकि वायलेंस तो जितनी पार्टीशन राइट में हुई उतनी शायद सिविल वार में भी नहीं होगी. So that is my reply. Sir, I think time is running out. It is already 7:30. So we should thank Justice Hemant Gupta, the author, and Madhavi ji, and thanks a lot of you, whole lot of you. Thank you very much for your time. And now I think we should discuss. Thank you.